Hello, I'm Kit, your friendly feminist cat lady spinster, and welcome to the first day of Tradmas. The 12 Days of Tradmas is a series looking at people in the trad or traditional movement. And for day one, we're going to discuss Wife in the Kitchen. Per her Instagram bio, she is his helpmeet and an ex/anti-feminist. She is also a 17th generation American and traditional values. So when you first look at her Instagram, you think you're going to get maybe some recipes or something because it's just a whole bunch of pictures of food, which makes sense because it does say Wife in the Kitchen, so you assume she's cooking a lot. But, well, the first post on this account is from July 5th of this year, and it begins, "As a wife, it is my duty and pleasure to cook for my husband, who spends 8 to 10 hours a day working in the summer heat to provide for our family." Okay. And then, "When I was a feminist, I resented doing my part because I had been brainwashed into believing duty was oppression and that my role in the home was restrictive and abusive as opposed to the freedom it truly is." Okay. "Being thanked for creating meals for us by the man I love is the most fulfilling part of my day. If I hadn't awakened from the lies of feminism, I would never have been able to take gratification from fulfilling my responsibilities as housewife. Before waking up from the toxic ideology that teaches traditional/real marriage is abusive in nature, I would have been consumed with resentment that I had created out of nothing, believing that having to wash the dishes one more time was somehow akin to enslavement. No longer being ruled by emotions that are manufactured by an ideology that just wants to destroy families is indescribable freedom." She does know that feminists get married and have kids and all that, right? But maybe from the parentheses, traditional real, if a marriage doesn't follow traditional gender roles, she doesn't consider it a real marriage. Therefore, since I would say a feminist would not be teaching submission in a marriage, therefore I figure she probably thinks that only submissive marriages are real. So I just want to say, you're washing dishes, you don't have to be gratified by it. And also, I mean, people wash dishes. It's nothing special. It's something that you have to do, especially if you don't have a dishwasher. And I really don't foresee anyone, feminist or no, equating washing dishes to enslavement. "I am so grateful to simply lean into my husband and be able to trust in his intelligence, rationality, and character. The feminist lies I always believed, stemming from an erratic, emotional, and often violent father, taught me I always had to control. As I aged, I was unable to separate the experiences I suffered at my father's hands from the greater example of true masculinity. Instead, I believed the reframing of male nature by feminists into abusive behaviors. I created all the stress and conflict, and I never knew it was of my own hand. So much wasted time I will never have back. I will never not be ashamed. My ego was my god my whole life, and I was totally unaware. But at least I woke up. Watching the women in my life still choose to inflict this toxic, hateful, unnatural ideology on themselves, their husbands, their children, and society as a whole is isolating and painful. I am grateful for this community." I kind of doubt it based on what she says here, but given that she was diagnosed with complex PTSD at 16, I really hope she got therapy, although I'm kind of doubting that she did. And also she's blaming herself. I mean, it's not her fault that her father was an awful person. And it's not her fault the way she reacted to that by thinking she had to be in control. And also, feminism doesn't teach that all men are violent. In fact, it teaches, I would say, the opposite, in that men are capable of emotions beyond jealousy and anger. Of course, she likes the transformed wife. "It's been interesting having a conversation with an independent woman in the comments of the transformed wife." What's an independent woman? Did the person call themselves that? Or is that something that Wife in the Kitchen is putting on this person she's been talking to? "When fathers do not lead, daughters suffer. It has always been known that the wife is the one who is responsible for creating the world by creating and tending the home." So wait, if a man turns out shitty, that's his mother's fault? "When women reject their sacred responsibility, societies crumble. So if a society crumbles, it's women's fault. Men, too, must stop catering to these women. The burden of this lies with both genders." Okay, well, I mean, at least she kind of blames men and women for society crumbling. Porn and the lie that sex is simply recreation, which feminism perpetuates, has helped to devalue and abuse sex into every twisted perversion. Editing Kit jumping in to note that despite having been such a radical feminist, she apparently doesn't know there are feminists who consider porn disgusting and degrading to women. Rainbow activism takes that to another level, and these ideas reinforce each other. All these things degrade the family, which in turn degrades society. Thus, we have a world of people begging the state to be responsible for their every choice. Source, please. The freedom I feel, and so many ex-feminists feel, when they've awakened from the mental illness and abusive behavior which shrouds itself in labels of equality and independence, is like nothing in this world. I am grateful to the point of tears on a regular basis that my own feminist behavior did not destroy my marriage and life. Well, apparently whatever her feminist behavior was did not scare her husband from marrying her. Also, I really feel like we're throwing the word mental illness around way too easily these days. So, Wife in the Kitchen is having a child, and she writes, I was always absolutely terrified to have children. Feminism enabled and nurtured this paranoia and told me it was okay to remain a perpetual adolescent, identifying with the pain I endured long ago. But feminism doesn't say someone should remain a perpetual adolescent, and just because you don't have a child, you can still have responsibilities and be an adult without having kids. This past year, God, it's always God, touched my husband's heart and transformed him. Watching this, I was transformed. My heart was changed, and now I am very close to having our first child, a baby girl. My pregnancy has been blessed with comfort and relative ease, as well as my husband's ability to be next to me and for me to lean into his headship. So I'm glad that her pregnancy is going well. I am, however, a little concerned where she says, I'm not having a baby shower as I don't know anyone where we live. I have never been more thankful in my life. In the past year, I rejected feminism entirely and have fought against it incessantly. I embraced the proper role of a wife instead of always trying to assuage my ego by controlling and being emotional. I leaned into my husband, ashamed to realize how little I had trusted his wisdom and guidance all this time. I have opened my eyes further and further to the truth, attempting to embody what I only know from observation. That God is real, that he loves us, that he will guide our lives, that what happens is his will, and it's okay to just wait and see, that I have no control. 2 nights ago, I called my mother and forgave her, as my husband has urged me to do for months. I was not sure how it would go, but it went in the best way I could have anticipated. Forgiving my father will be more difficult, but also less so, since he is no longer on this plane. I already feel so much freer. I kind of wonder if her anger against feminism is actually her anger against her parents for the way they raised her. I'm not going to go into that because even though she did post it publicly, it still seems a bit personal to be picked apart by a stranger. But I've seen a lot of posts about how spouses push people to forgive their parents, and I just, if your spouse tells you that they don't want to speak to their mother or their father or any other family, and even if they don't want to tell you why, you should trust they have a good reason for cutting them out of their lives instead of pushing them to, maybe it's just forgiveness and her husband will be satisfied with that. But at the same time, it's not his family, so why would he care if she forgave her parents? They're her parents. Unless she was talking about it a lot, but in that case, therapy would be better because just because you say, I forgive you to someone doesn't mean you actually forgive them. I hope she knows that reacting to trauma is okay and therapy is also okay. There is no shame in it. Since liberalism is the process of freeing yourself from any and every responsibility as an infringement on your rights and freedoms as a fully liberated individual, its end state can only result in antinatalism and self-destruction. I came across this quote from an Anon on Twitter recently, and I have continued to come back to it for its truth. In letting go of this mental mutation and accepting natural law, I was able to overcome the evil and hatred that had always existed within me, thanks to the complex trauma, the liberalism and feminism, and my own human nature. It is astonishing to me how wrong I was, how utterly pathetic I was, and for so long. And it is so clear to me now how feminism and all other mutant ideologies enable, encourage, and enhance these traits within people who are predisposed toward them, through grooming, through generations of existence that should have been nipped at the bud by childhood illness, but now, thanks to industrialization and democracy, have their own population of shrieking harpies demanding their degeneracy be celebrated and all that is good be destroyed in their wake. So daily I awaken and I lean into God and my husband, knowing I cannot control anything, knowing my purpose, and knowing that while awareness is vital, my life is within these walls, loving these people, protecting them from those who would eat them. Huh. So there is a lot here. I feel like she's very hard on herself. I don't know how much of it is real and how much of it is for Instagram, but it seems to me like she's focused all the things that she used to believe into now being against, very much against what she used to believe. Granted, she never really, I guess she was scared to have children. And she also mentions hating men, but she got married, so I'm going to assume she didn't hate men that much, at least not that particular man, but that should have been nipped at the bud by childhood illness. Is she saying that if we hadn't industrialized and democratized, degeneracy would never have come about because all the people that would have believed in them would have died from childhood illnesses? Growing up, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, but it never seemed like she was ever fulfilled by it. To be fair, the man she married, who was my father, was a very abusive husband. He regularly screamed at me for hours on end, used exercise as punishment in the heat of southern summers, was manipulative, cruel, mean, and hateful, and left me at age 16 in 2000 with an official diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I do not lay all blame on my father. He is certainly responsible for his own behavior, but my mother is for hers. However, this upbringing set the stage for me to be seduced by feminism, which wrongly blames all men for all the problems in the world and excuses women from their own poor choices. As such, for much of my life, I excused my mother for her choice to not leave this dangerous situation we were in, until she found another man and wrecked his home when I was 15, and then finally found the motivation to move out. So all individuals are responsible for their own choices, but in the trad movement, women are supposed to stay home and have kids and take care of the house. If your husband is abusive, how are you supposed to leave when you haven't worked in years? And thus, if you had any marketable skills before, employers will look at them and see that they're out of date. And if you've never worked, well, you're not going to be able to find a job where you can support your family. And this is also a good example of why everyone should be able to choose their life course. What if her mother didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom? And she said it never seemed like she was ever fulfilled by it. Of course, it's probably hard to be fulfilled by anything when your husband is abusive and you can't see another way out. And in listening to this again, I'm now beginning to wonder if she accepted biblical gender roles because, well, being a submissive wife who meekly agrees with the husband's wants and desires is probably a great way to avoid most arguments. Today I woke up at 6 a.m. and rushed to my very tiny rural grocery store, and that makes me even more nervous that she knows no one there. They apparently live very rural, to get buttermilk for my husband's biscuits. I was dismayed to discover that they have recently removed many of the well-selling animal products to replace them with toxic, overly processed, so-called vegan food, including an entire cold case, which was once milk, now to different brands of nut and grain milk. Of course, these non-foods were all still there, and the ingredients I needed were sold out, despite the doors having opened only 10 minutes prior. I live in beef country. I am surrounded by thousands of acres of green pastures with blissful cows roaming around. No one here is vegan and no one wants that crap. Yet the corporate chain I go to when I can't get to the larger town with more options 30 minutes away is pushing this globalist New World Order diet on people who have been here for generations, raising their cattle, and simply want to be able to eat what they desire. Well, conspiracy theories are kind of part and parcel of the trad movement, but I think that if no one buys these new products, they will stop selling them because they are a business, they are in it to make money, and also your very tiny rural grocery store is a corporate chain. Nothing against reasonable vegans, as I know I have a few who follow me, but I am rapidly getting to the point that I oppose this ideology I used to adhere to religiously as much as I oppose feminism and leftism, two other ideologies I used to religiously adhere to. Veganism is an anti-white, anti-working class, anti-family religious cult which bullies people with the same emotionally manipulative tactics as all others which fit that description, like feminism and transgenderism. They're also anti-natalists, which are some of the most vile, hateful people on this earth who've been so duped by the lies of anthropomorphic climate change and white guilt that they literally want to destroy their own people. With the added destruction of the body and mind through malnutrition based only on plants, it's a fast downward spiral for most. Veganism is anti-white? I need some proof, some sources, an explanation, or something to back that up. Everything does not have to be a conspiracy. Veganism for me was an extension of feminism, which in and of itself is a rejection of reality, based in emotionally charged dogmatic ways of looking at the world. I wanted to be ethically consistent and had seen enough content from other vegan feminists. I've never seen a vegan feminist. That I finally went down the rabbit hole. Oh no, wait. I think the queer Kiwi? I think? For those unfamiliar, these shaming tactics claim that female animals are oppressed in similar ways as women, allegedly through their reproductive systems, and that in a similar way to women being property historically, animals are currently considered property. The only person I've seen say that is that vegan teacher, and pretty much everyone agrees that she is insane. Meat, as a concept, was stretched to include the pornified objectification of women, with the source of the societal cancer totally ignored, and of course the solution of a traditional society based in marriage and family being degraded and redefined as oppressive in and of itself. People are still getting married, so clearly this redefinition of marriage and family did not work. Pornography and prostitution, from a radical, second-wave feminist view, is entirely due to male consumer drive and women's choice to participate, even when clearly not coerced. It sounds like she kind of blames women for porn. Was and is attributed to the modern patriarchal world, which supposedly does not allow women to exist without being objectified or viewed as inanimate, consumable sex objects. And thus, participating in pornography or prostitution is always a coerced act. Thus, their decision to do these things aren't really their decision because they are targets, or they are lacking other ways of being employed. Being a wife and mother is never considered a viable option, only degraded. But for one, you have to marry someone who would agree to that, and you'd also have to marry someone who makes enough money to support two people on one income. I go into this at length because I was an ethical vegan, and I did this because I felt I had the moral obligation to do so. Are you sure you were an ethical vegan? Because it sounds an awful lot like pretty much everything she did was because that was what she was told to do and not because she felt the need to do it, that she felt the belief in it. I truly, deeply believed humans have no physical need to consume animal products. I read How Not to Die and the China Study. I read countless vegan theory books and feminist theory as well. This was extremely important to me because for most of my life, I attempted to understand the behavior of my parents and their damage of me through a political lens. I feel bad for her because her parents do sound like horrible people, but sometimes there is just no real good reason why people behave the way they do. I took to heart the viewpoint that those who suffered health issues as vegans were doing it wrong, ignoring the fact that there is no right way to be malnourished. Veganism underscored and reinforced the misery and hatred I felt as a leftist, trans-identified woman when I began, and even more so as a radical feminist when I ended. I did not simply change my diet, I gave away my expensive and rather large collection of purses and clothes made with leather. I sought out expensive alternatives for shoes and clothing, or when thrifting, avoided wool and leather. I looked into protesting with Anonymous for the Voiceless. I watched hours of street activism on YouTube. It was my entire identity and life, though not nearly as deeply as many others take it. I kind of wonder at that. She sounds kind of like maybe obsessive. It was veganism and feminism, and now it's being a trad wife. The only positive I got from being vegan was very near the end when I was starting to really come to terms with all the ideological lies I had believed in the past, specifically feminism, transgenderism, and climate change, and was beginning to extricate myself from the mental illness that called itself the progressive left. I watched a video about girls who celebrated their multiple abortions, and directly after that, watched the live-action animation of the reality of surgical abortion. I had never done anything like that in the past, never even given it thought, because when I was 13 or so and given the talk, my mother, who was the one who did it, told me that abortion was a surgical procedure to remove a clump of cells and had the same moral weight as having a tumor or tooth removed. I never had a reason to question this, though instinctively I knew I never wanted to be put in the position to make that choice and was very careful about being on the pill my entire adult life. So, as a vegan, when I realized the reality of abortion, I knew I had to reject the pro-choice position I'd always held on, the basis of being vegan and ethical consistency, and this was the foundation and cornerstone of my avalanche of rejection of my previous viewpoints and eventually ending up where I am now. My pro-life position is not religiously based and came long before my experiences within Christianity. In researching conservatism from the perspective of one who'd always mocked it and been surrounded by progressives my whole life, I was exposed to many people who were former vegans and former progressives who told me the health effects they suffered from being vegan. Since I was finally, to my shame, listening to my husband about things instead of being a know-it-all bitch, I began realizing his continual concern for my mental decline was realistic. In the past, I had simply promised to take more supplements, or eat more flaxseed, or whatever. But one day, very near to my vegan anniversary at the end of October last year, I finally decided it was no longer going to work for me. I could no longer sacrifice my health for my ideological position. I cried a little, because at the time I still had the weakness of fallen womanhood and was ruled by emotions and ego. We went to the store and got chicken, and I ate the entire package in one sitting. That sounds kind of like a stomach ache, but okay. Within a day, my moods evened out, which was an incredible change for me since I'd always struggled with depression, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and the mental illness and misery that is enabled and promoted within the ideology of the left, feminism, the need for control, ego, and believing equality was real instead of hierarchy and harmony. This, more than anything else, made it possible for me to clearly see how I have been, my marriage, how toxic feminism is, how it destroys women, men, the family, and children, as well as eventual awareness of the other ways leftist ideologies, alternative lifestyles, and moral choices, and the guilt programmed into some of us for existing are far more than simple disagreements. I thank God daily I woke up from everything. Now I understand that equality is a false god, and that my ancestors evolved eating nutrient-dense animal products, berries, honey, and eggs. I do not know whether any specific group can truly be vegan naturally, but I know with certainty ethnic Europeans, whose ancestors lived through long winters without farming, cannot. I do thankfully have the ability to source my animal foods from local farms, and I am aware of the conditions and treatment. In understanding the hierarchy of humans and animals, I was able to recognize and accept the hierarchy of male and female. Everything but the bacon was provided by a friend's home garden. I thought she didn't know anyone where she lived, but okay. I have leaned into faith recently. I am fearful, of course, but I also know that in my own life I have so many blessings. My husband loves and cares for me, and I trust him with every atom of my body and soul. To surrender control in the manner of biblical gender roles is both terrifying and so freeing. The stress of my egotistical need to control everything is gone. I know, too, there is so much beyond either of our control, so we both just wait and see and pray. I am so grateful, so grateful. It occurs to me as I read these accounts that really it's just essentially surrendering control of your own life and being able to be a kid again. And that's what makes her happy and it works for her. It's really great that she trusts her husband with every atom of her body because she is giving him control of her entire life. So she posted this story on her Instagram. Did you know the official rainbow, the Lord's creation, has 7 colors while the official sodomite flag only uses 6? In the scriptures, 7 represents completion and perfection, while 6 represents falling short, imitation, and Satan. The sodomite flag skips indigo. Indigo is the color of royalty and of spiritual knowledge and wisdom, often connecting heaven and earth. Sodomites hate God and do not want to be connected to him. God creates, Satan imitates. Well, this is not really a surprise because it seems to me that there is no other way to be part of the trad movement than to be homophobic. So, and of course transphobic, this is really quite a turnaround from someone who just this past year said they were trans-identified. I voted for Boebert. Generally, I like her. She should never have apologized. Neither her or Omar should be in office, however. Boebert should be at home with her family. Omar should be back in whatever shithole country she's from with her family. Suspicion is beginning to be created that when they say they want to go back, they mean they want to go back when it was okay to be openly racist. And that is Wife in the Kitchen. On one hand, I feel bad for her, and I really think she could benefit from therapy, which I'm going to hazard a guess she has not received, or even really considered, because I'm sure if she had, she would have mentioned it. And then on the other, she's homophobic, racist, anti-choice, and doesn't believe in equality. Alright, well, that is it for day 1 of Tradmas. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as possible considering the content, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!